that he has received input from some of the boaters who may not be happy with the way that the marina was being operated. Off target, I am sure that there are many voters in Norfolk County who are unhappy with the way that we are probably operating Norfolk County. You were on that committee, am I correct?
I was chair of the advisory committee in 2009, 10, and yep.
And did you and your committee see value in having that committee?
Well, certainly there's a basic value to having input. Not without frustration, as Councillor had said, but certainly there's value in having public input in whatever manner it might take.
Mayor Luke, for
Mr. Chair and Paul, I want to thank you. I know this has been a long time getting to where you're standing right now through no fault of your own. A very good presentation. I agree with the message you're bringing. Paul, what do you see as a workable number in your opinion for an advisory committee as it pertains to that facility?
Oh, I'm not recalling what the large size of group that we had. We had a rather diverse advisory committee group. Something in the order of 8 or 9, I would think, was what we had seen. We're certainly open to discussion as to the bylaw that we now have with the as I had said earlier with speaking with Bill Cridlin, that we're aware that there is a bylaw in place now providing an advisory committee for the marina, but we suspect that there should be some tweaking to that, and certainly part of that discussion, Mayor Luke, will be the composition and the size of that committee. Ideally, 7 to 9 is a common board of directors advisory committee type.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. And I have one last question, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if I heard you right or I just didn't get it here, but I heard something about putting it together for the 2018 boating season. Wouldn't it seem that this is the beginning of 2017 that we could move ahead with this if council supports this and get things together as soon as possible? And I recognize that the summer is coming on us real fast here, but it would seem to me that something's in place and ready to go this fall after a boating season would be a good time. Do you want to comment on the timing of this?
Oh, well, thank you. We had suggested that being in place for 2018 boating season was probably being optimistic. I think it was you that had mentioned about things and how they move. So we're being, fair about the situation and suggesting that being ready for the boating season in 2017 cannot happen. No. 2018 is rather enthusiastic, I think, but as long as we're moving forward and we've settled the issue of governance, boy, we're happy.
You're welcome. Thank you for the question. If there are no further speakers, I do require someone to receive this deputation. Councillor Wells, thank you. Councillor Wells has moved that we receive the deputation of Mr. Paul Lipsett with respect to the Port Dover Marina. Those in favour? I see no one opposed. Paul, thank you very much, and you can take your seat. And as I said, we are certainly going to deal with the report shortly, but I am going to move on and allow Mr. Cridlin and Chief Dix to present their report. So thank you for your patience. And Council, that is going to take us then to page 55 on our agenda, which is Staff Report CSD 17-03, a budget amendment, the award of tender for 1 pumper and 2 tankers. So Mr. Cridlin, we'll turn it over to you initially, and probably you'll turn it over to Chief Dix at some point.
Thank you, and through the chair to county councillors. Yes, I'll pass it off very quickly to Chief Dix. He's authored the report. It is a budget amendment, and he has worked very closely with the finance department in trying to explain a lot of the budget amendment is tied up with the US dollar right now. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chief Dix.
Chief Dix, and before I let you start, I want to thank all of the gentlemen who are here from the various stations this evening in support of this. We really appreciate your work, and thank you for coming. Chief Dick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I ask your permission to introduce our firefighters this evening? So what I'll do is I'll start with our members of our apparatus committee. And we have an apparatus committee that represents all of the Norfolk Fire Service on the east and west side. And behind me is our emergency vehicle technician and district chief from Station 5 in Delhi, Max Adam. Right beside Max, we have one of our shorter members of our fire department, our district chief in Station 4 in Teeterville, Mike Bergman. And we have our deputy fire chief, Gord Stillwell, sitting right there. And in the front row, close to me, is our deputy district chief from Waterford, Dave Thompson. And Mr. Chairman, we have our 3 stations that are hoping to receive the approval for the apparatus tonight, and I'd like to introduce them as well. Station 1 in Simcoe, we have our district chief, Doug Holden, here this evening. And from Station 6 in Cortland, we have Captain Barney Shepard here tonight. And I'm going to ask our Deputy District Chief from Station 7, Don Holbrook. Don, if you would take the opportunity to introduce your firefighters tonight that are here, please. And right behind you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us to do that and for allowing the opportunity to come and fit us in. Is greatly appreciated. Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we have done in the past several years now, when we're designing our fire apparatus and considering the replacement, our apparatus committee, which represents all the stations, and I send out an email to the district chiefs that are up for replacement, and I ask them to form a committee to take a look at their wants and needs and take a look at our standard. And then what happens then is we invite them to meet with our apparatus committee, and we take a look at their wants and needs, and then through 1 or 2 or whatever meetings it takes, we come to a consensus on what we want to build and applicable to their area. And I can say that we're staying within our standard that council approved a few years ago. And one of the challenges we had this time, Mr. Chairman, if you remember, that these apparatus were actually deferred a year because of the U.S. exchange. And we waited the year, it didn't improve, so we had approval from council for 2017 to go out and seek some vendors. And what we did in the meantime is we did increase the budget to account for any U.S. exchange. And we can see from the report that we weren't successful this time, and I was quite shocked when I saw that. And one of the reasons when we delved into it a little bit is this tender went out in 2016 in November, and it closed in January of 2017. And we would usually anticipate that the cabin chassis would be either brand new 2016 or brand new 2017. What we found, Mr. Chairman, this time is all the bidders actually increased 2 price levels. They bid on a 2018 cabin chassis, so we didn't expect that, and why they did that, we're unsure. When we take a look at our product that we have, we're very consistent on the application in our different districts of how we do business on the fire ground. We're satisfied with our product, with the pumper and the 2 tankers. The challenge is I'm here before you tonight for a budget amendment, and it's big. It's over $360,000 that we're here to discuss. And one of the components in the report through our treasurer was an opportunity when going forward is how can we make this better? And one of the opportunities we can look at is the method of how we do business with that U.S. dollar. Currently, we have the bids come in a Canadian dollar, so everything is done right up front. And through our chief financial officer, there's an opportunity perhaps down the road is to go into U.S. dollars and then only pay when the cabin chassis is due or when the final inspection is done. And there could be some savings that way. So having said that, Mr. Chair, that's the report. I'd be very open to any questions. And you'll see at the end of the report that we're recommending that Fort Garry be awarded this bid. And having said that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and this would go to the Chief. Chief, when did you get these bids?
The bids, through you, Mr. Chairman, were closed on January 10th of 2017.
So you had the results on January the 10th?
That's correct.
Did you mention this pretty sizable increase of $363,000 at budget time?
Not at budget time, Mr. Chair. We increased our budget, so hopefully we wouldn't be in this situation, to be within budget.
But in January, you knew that you were not within the budget. Am I correct on that?
On January 10th, when the budget's closed, we knew we were coming for a budget amendment.
And I'm not being overly disrespectful, Mr. Chair. However, I would have appreciated that when we were dealing with the budget, that we knew that this was going to be a problem.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to wade in on this. This is a capital budget item. It was approved by council back in October. The budget that Councillor Wells is referencing, I believe, is the operating budget that was dealt with in January. These are two completely different pieces of business. I do respect your comment, sir, that perhaps that should have been brought to council's attention earlier, but it would have had no effect on the 2017 operating budget the council was reviewing at that time.
Again, I'm not going to debate this, Mr. Chair, and he is correct. At least we would have known ahead of time that we had a problem. That's all.
Through the chair. The only thing I guess I could add, Councillor Wells, is often when tenders do come in, there's a bit of a process to go through. Is it, is the math correct? Does it meet spec, that sort of thing? So especially in this case where Chief Dix would have to meet with the equipment committee, it could take a few weeks for them to actually sit down and say, all in, all out, that sort of thing. So it's a bit of a process. It wasn't as if on the 10th it was solid and bulletproof. There was a process to go through and fine tune and see that they bid what exactly we wanted, if that helps.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Black, then Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Chief Dix. There are absolutely no Canadian manufacturers that produce these fire trucks?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, on the cabin chassis portion, we do not have a Canadian builder at this time.
Wow. Did we used to have somebody that used to build them in Canada?
I'm going to look to who did we have that?
Up until probably 3 years ago, the last cabin chassis builder in Canada was a Mack builder in Quebec.
Could you come forward to the mic?
Or pass it over?
Chief, just because I'm sure everyone's interested in this.
The last cabin chassis builders we had, I believe, was Mack builders up in Quebec. And I believe they moved their operations to the States probably about 3 years ago. We used to have Freightliner International, everybody around that built cabin chassis. We don't anymore. Fort Garry is a Canadian builder of apparatus, but unfortunately everything does come, the vast majority of all the materials to build these trucks comes from the States now.
Okay, Fort Garry, is that Indiana?
Winnipeg.
In Winnipeg, okay. And the second question, wants and needs. I heard you make reference to the term wants and needs twice. So what I'm interested to know is what would be the, I have no problems with the needs aspect of it, but the wants. Do you have a list? Can you identify the cost of the wants? And is that something that we could reduce some of the costs by eliminating the wants versus the needs?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, usually the wants are in addition to what we have as our standard. And when we discuss it at the apparatus committee, we try to stay with the standard. So usually the want is above our standard.
Okay, so could costs be reduced by eliminating the wants?
They would be in addition to if we put some of those wants on.
Okay, so I'm not understanding what you're saying.
Councillor, I think what the chief is saying is that the bids that we see in front of us are for the needs, not the wants. The wants would have been provisional tender items over and above these amounts.
Got it. Thanks.
Mayor Luke, then Councillor Height.
Thank you very much, and Terry and gentlemen, thank you for being here, and certainly when I read this report, Mr. Chair, I'm coming to my questions. I have to be right up front and say I am rather surprised at the cost today for a new tanker of $669,000 roughly for one tanker, correct, Chief?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's with the U.S. exchange, and that's correct.
Oh, yes, that's the Canadian price, but that's
Yeah.
the Canadian dollar equivalent to the American cost. And I certainly am well aware of the exchange rate. It's crazy. And we talked here about wants and needs. Is it fair to say that these two tankers are a basic tanker? Is that the right terminology, that this is nothing with lots of bells and whistles? It's a basic tanker?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, this is our standard tanker.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other question I have is certainly on the bottom of page 2 of the report, and it's our page 56. Certainly, you and Mr. Cridlin, whoever in this report has certainly gave us the rationale, as I call it, for the comparison of the tanker bought in 2011, the tanker purchased in 23, and now we fast forward 4 years later with a higher U.S. rate. And it says here that the design specifications in 2011 and 2013, Mr. Chair, for tankers changed, adding functionality and increasing cost of the apparatus. What will this 2017 or these 2017 tankers have now that are needed that there was not a need for in 2013? Is there a lot of equipment? I mean, the difference in price, it's some $47,000 US per tanker, the way I did my math. What are we getting for that extra $47,000 US?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, back in 2011, when we presented our last tanker, it was an international commercial cabin chassis. In 2013, when we came to council on our standard, we moved into and got approval from council on our purpose-built cabin chassis, which is a much more safer type of cabin chassis. And from there to present, so from that 2013 to present, it's increased around $40-something thousand, I think, that we have. So from the 2013 standard that the council approved, there has been no additions or design changes.
So, Mr. Chair, just so I'm clear on this, what we're being proposed to order here in these two tankers are somewhat identical to what was ordered in 2013.
Through Mr. Chairman, we didn't order in 2013. It was a council report that we approved the standard. But that's correct. From that standard to now, there has been no changes.
My apology. You do say they were tendered in 2011, a tanker, but in 2013, design specifications for tankers changed. And the specifications were changed by the province? By whom?
That was through us when we did a presentation to council from the commercial cabin chassis into the purpose-built cabin chassis for the fire service, where we had the 4 doors or 2 doors, but we had rollover protection now in our cabin chassis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all for now.
I think part of it was the cab itself, wasn't it? As you say, purpose-built. I think it carries 5 firefighters now instead of 4 in the old design. Is that?
If we're talking about the pumper, Mr. Chairman, we can carry
Yeah, okay,
6 and
sorry.
8, but the
Yep.
tanker will carry 3,
Thank
or
you.
2 now.
Right. Councillor Height and then Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the Chief. Chief, it's mentioned here that one of the bids was rejected. Would you be able to tell me which vendor that was?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if I can at this stage or not. I'd have to seek clarification on that.
I think you're okay.
Yeah.
You have the
Councillor,
list of them.
May I ask that perhaps staff could provide that to us by way of a confidential memo?
Okay, and then my question that goes along with that is, I believe the last time we purchased one of these, was it not from Armprior?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that'd be correct.
And why were they weren't even in the top 4? Were they the ones that were eliminated? That's what I want to know.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, at the very start, when there's the public bid opening, Arnprior was rejected at the very start in the bid opening.
And for what was the reason?
I didn't receive that from purchasing.
But that's rather odd for me then, because we just bought our truck from them. And I'm looking at it as a maintenance side of things. If you have all GMCs, obviously you wrench on them a lot. So if you buy one Dodge, well, the parts aren't interchangeable. So if you're buying arm prior trucks and your maintenance guys are used to maintaining them, now you're switching trucks up, it makes it a little harder.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, good question, but when we design our trucks, we have 3 or 4 different manufacturers, so it's our specification on their truck. So our design is the same. It doesn't matter if we go from iron prior to metal fab to E1, they'll build our product.
But to engine level?
Pardon
To
me?
even engine level?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay. And then my next question has to be, like there's a ton of financial figures in here based on a U.S. exchange rate. And I'm not even sure why that's in there, because we're in Canada. And I understand that fire trucks are built with some U.S. parts, but these are Canadian companies. I think it's never a good idea to start hedging bets on a currency for a municipality in another country. So, and I'll give you an example. In November, the U.S. exchange rate was even higher than what it is today. So if we did our capital budget in November, and that was a known factor then, you would still be offside another 5 points. Because of that, I hope our finance guys don't go too crazy with the U.S. funds, because we buy money in Canadian at Norfolk County, right? So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could pass that to Mr. Ford.
Sure, I'm not sure there was a question there, but I'll ask Mr. Ford if he wants to comment.
Mr. Chairman, the purchasing policy requires that we request tenders in Canadian dollars.
yep.
And so we're subject to the vendor quoting based upon whatever their exchange costs are at the day that they do the tender in order for them to submit their proposal. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we get into a currency speculation on a go-forward basis, but I think what we need to do next time we do tender is to be mindful of the fact that the currency exchange can be a big factor, which may require that we either A, not tender in Canadian dollars, we'd have to get council's dispensation to approve that, or that we defer the tender, and we'd have some input in that in terms of what the market's going to look like. I mean, what the speculation is the market's going to look like. Today, the market's even worse than it was in January for U.S. currency. So we could have guessed wrong in January. All I'm saying is that we need to be mindful of that when we tender it sometime in the future, and take that into consideration. But we are required to issue tenders in Canadian dollars.
Okay. So my next question to the treasurer is, now that we have sort of set the bar for pumpers and tankers, will you be updating the next capital project? Because I believe we have some in our long-term forecast.
Yes, we would be doing that, and we will try our darndest to crystal ball gaze what the impact of the U.S. currency exchange would be, but if I could do that accurately, I wouldn't be sitting here.
Right. And is there money in the reserve account for this?
Yes.
But we require a budget amendment of $363,000. That's what we're over budget today.
Yes, sir. That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Where will that money come from?
There are sufficient funds in that reserve to cover that additional cost.
Is there? So we won't be issuing debentures for this one?
Absolutely not.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Councillor Columbus, then Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These are capital budget dollars, but if the $363,000 was on the levy, that would be approaching 0.5%, I believe, if it was that way. But, which is significant. Is there an absolute need to replace these 3 trucks at this time? I guess that's the first question I have.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, 2 years ago, when we went into 2016, we did defer it because of that U.S. exchange, and we had that 1 year only because on that 20-year replacement would affect how we conduct our fire underwriters' water shuttle certification is based on the 20-year. So we had up until this year to make it happen. So through you, Mr. Chairman, to defer it, I think we would be in a position where we would probably lose our certification for our water shuttle for our dry hydrants.
So you're saying it would affect people's insurance, residents'
Absolutely.
insurance?
Yep.
Okay. And Chief Dix, you're a municipal taxpayer. Do you feel that this is good value for the residents of Norfolk and those three communities?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to speak on behalf of the committee that we believe this is the best value for the corporation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brunton and then Mayor Luke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is the dollar price fixed now? Like, we don't have to worry about exchange rates down the line here now, do we?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The company that's made the tender or submitted the tender, they're on the hook if the U.S. exchange is anything different. We will pay them Canadian dollars based upon what's in this report.
There's a chance they built that possibility in there.
They, I mean, they're in the same boat that we are, Mr. Chairman. They could, at the time that the payments are made in Canadian dollars, they may be onside or offside, depending what the exchange rate is. They could make $1 or they could lose $1. But we will pay it in Canadian dollars.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Dix, Mr. Chairman. Is a lot of the bodies on these trucks aluminum?
Through Mr. Chairman, aluminum bodies, that's correct.
Not the chassis and all that from these trucks. They're not aluminum, are they?
I'm going to take...
The question again, please?
The chassis on the trucks themselves,
Are steel.
steel. It's
The cabs are aluminum. The chassis itself is full channel steel, double wall.
Okay, and can you give me, I think I heard this once before, but refresh me, why aluminum again?
Pardon me?
Why the aluminum cab and whatever tanker, pumper?
The aluminum cab, most of the truck industry is aluminum now, sir. On any of it, it's weight purposes, and the aluminum is more durable as far as corrosion, as long as it's kept up. And the aluminum cabs are also supported with rollover protection and that sort of stuff in the purpose built.
Okay, I'm going to ask some specific questions here on. Okay, first of all, I guess the pumper in Langton. Can you give me the year of that pumper?
Let's see, 97, 6.
96? And do you know what the kilometers would be on that?
Not off the top of my head.
Is it aluminum? Is it all
The body on that truck is aluminum. I believe the cab is aluminum on. Is it aluminum? I'm not gonna.
Okay.
Actually, it's composite. The front end of it's fiberglass.
Oh, that's interesting. The one in Simcoe, the tanker, is it what year would that one be?
It's also a 96.
96? And you don't know the Ks on it, eh? I assume they're low kilometers, would they not be?
Most of the apparatus, in compared to a truck industry, are low kilometers at the end of their lifespan, but they are over the 20 years.
So okay, and what about the last one there, the tanker in Cortland?
It is a 797.
97. And again, you don't know the Ks. What, an aluminum body on this one?
Yes.
Okay. And all these vehicles, what, I realize the year says they're old, but are they wore out or rusting away? Or I guess for aluminum don't rust, does it? What's it, oxidize or something? Are they not, what happens to these trucks now once we get the new ones?
We're running into age fatigue with them, for one. These trucks sit loaded, continually waiting to go. We start to run into suspension problems with them. And this is where, through NFPA and that advisory board through them, they're putting these timeline on these apparatus that they don't want to see them in the fleets any longer. We typically run into pump issues in the last few years with the trucks due to water quality, tank issues, these water tanks in them, the flexing of them, and they can become very costly in a short period of time.
So there would be repair records for all these vehicles, I take
there
it,
is.
county garage? Okay.
Yes, there is.
I guess my last question is, what happens to these vehicles?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we've done is as one comes out of service, it would go in as our first spare. And then it gets rotated through, and as the surplus comes up, then they're deemed surplus and they're put on the auction.
And Councillor, there have been a couple of occasions where we've donated them to other fire services in Northern Ontario communities, I recall, and I think that still can happen if the county deems it appropriate.
So there is some value to them.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, $1,000, it's very minimal.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor Luke and then Councillor Saunders.
Yeah, thanks for, just a couple more questions through you to Mr. Chief Dix, Mr. Chair. Back to my questioning. So the last tanker that Norfolk County tendered and purchased was in 2011. 6 years ago, roughly, five and a half.
Correct, that's correct.
And the design was changed by our committee in 2013, adding more functionality and obviously increasing the costs. So we do not, if we purchase these two tankers, we do not have a tanker in our fleet now that would be in this sort of league, this enhanced vehicle, if I can use that word.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we have our Tank 9 in Port Rowan would be a similar design. So the cabin chassis would be the same as we're going to put on these tankers.
Through the chair, what year did we purchase the Port Rowan? Was that the one in 11?
That's 2014.
I believe it's 2014, Mr. Chairman.
So we have purchased tankers since 2011, 2014.
That's correct. Not in 2011. That was the conventional. It was in 2014 where we purchased our first purpose-built tanker cabin chassis.
Okay, I didn't realize that from the report, and that doesn't matter. And I would think that 2014, the tanker would have been cheaper than the one today, obviously, 3 years ago. That'd be a fair statement.
I believe, Mr. Chairman, we came in under budget that year with the apparatus we purchased.
And with this new tanker again, if the fire alarm goes off and there's a call in Cortland or in Simcoe, you're saying that these enhancements would allow 5 or 6 firefighters to be transported in that vehicle from the station. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, no, that's not correct.
Okay, I misunderstood you.
The cabin chassis for the tanker would seat 2.
Would seat 2.
Would seat 2. So we're moving water to the
Yes, to the fire site.
That's correct.
So no more capacity, just enhancements. One was the rollover.
That would
Yeah.
be part of it, right?
I really apologize because I don't know anything about specifications on a fire truck. I know they're big, and they're red, and they're really shiny. The guys keep them really, you can see them a mile away. I know how well they look after them. But I'm just trying to visualize what now these new specifications are going to, what advantage on safety and service, what we're getting for this additional $47,000 roughly.
Right. Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we found is by going to the purpose-built truck, the parts are there, whereas the old conventional ones, it's getting harder and harder to find parts. So we have a part issue. We have the safety, increased safety factor. we have the resale ability. These will have a better resale value at the end rather than our conventional tankers now. And I could turn to our emergency vehicle technician.
Also got better warranties on the cab and chassis for the life of the vehicle.
Better warranties on the vehicles.
Okay, that's enough from me. Mr. Chair, and again, Chief Dix, I'm asking these because, in all due respect, when I read this report, I certainly saw the increase in costs, a change in design, but quite honestly, I didn't really fully understand what those change in specifications were, what we were getting for the additional compared to what I could say was somewhat of a conventional or standard. So I do apologize if I'm hammering away here, but I didn't get it from the report. What exactly are we gaining with that increase in cost over what we have traditionally, I'll say, been using? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Sonnenberg, then Height.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I've got issue with is this 20-year lifespan. Here we have vehicles that are made of fiberglass. That doesn't rust. Aluminum doesn't rust. We have double-walled steel frames. That should be pretty durable. The engines have very little hours on them, comparatively speaking to other vehicles on the road. And yet someone has determined that 20 years is the limit. I've got a tractor that's 50 years old. It'll start up tomorrow morning in the freezing cold. It'll run perfectly, and it'll do the job. Why has someone determined that 20 years is the lifespan of a fire truck? Anybody got a reasonable answer for that?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I don't have the answer for that. We've had many discussions with our fire underwriters and bus certification of why they picked that 15. And most of the municipal fire departments are at 15 years. And we have that luxury of having the 15 plus a secondary type of component in there that lasts for the 20 years that we squeak in under the 20 years. And they don't rate it after 20 years in insurance purposes.
You're welcome. Councillor Height, then Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick one. So this is a 96? Is that what I caught earlier? The vehicles we're replacing, they're a 96 model?
Through you, Mr. Chair, 2 of ours are 96 and 197.
Okay. And what was the resale value? I think you told Councillor Brown I missed
For
it.
the tankers, I'd probably say $1,000. For the pumper,
Depends who bids.
depends on bidding, but $2,000 to $3,000.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this kind of equipment we would put out on the same sort of public sale of surplus equipment websites that we do everything else. Yep, okay. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, just a general question to the Chief. Are most municipalities going towards these purpose-built units?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, through my contacts at the Ontario Fire Chief Show that happens every May, and speaking with them on what municipalities are buying and speaking with our surrounding municipalities, the trend is purpose-built for the fire service. That's correct.
You're welcome. Councillor Geisens and then Columbus.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr.
Doesn't matter.
Yes, sir. I was going to call you mayor there for a minute. Good man, okay. Yeah. I was going to move what's on page 55, I guess. We have to have, it's unfortunate that we are caught in our Canadian dollar being so low compared to the American dollar. I think that we need to go ahead with this, because if we don't do it this year, we're going to have to do it next year. So I'm suggesting that we go forward with this, and I don't like it any better than probably than anybody, but I believe that it's necessary. You heard them talk about it could cause some problems for some of the residents in those towns as far as the insurance is concerned. So I think we should go ahead and get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Columbus.
Mr. Chairman, I would really like to know on what happened with that Arn Prior bid, and how do we get more information on that? Like, where did it disappear to?
I wonder, Councillor, if it's acceptable to you, as I said with Councillor Height's inquiry earlier, I think Ms. Webb has noted, we would like a confidential memo to council from the purchasing folks explaining those two questions.
Good.
Just because there may be some issues with disclosing it in a public session.
Sure,
Okay?
thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I know, Councillor Black, I think I saw your hand again.
Yes, yeah, I'll support the motion, but just another question through you, Mr. Chairman, to
Okay.
the chief. I guess it's firmly established that we're on a 20-year cycle for buying new trucks. Does that also go for the aerial truck?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, actually, it's not. They're recommending right now an aerial on 15 years, and we've been in discussions with fire underwriters and our fuss people to see how we can extend that like they've done with the 20 years on the pumpers and tankers. So I may be able to give an update at later on. We're in active discussions with them.
Okay, and that aerial truck, I think, is close. It's probably around 14 years old.
I believe it's up in 2019, I believe. So we are actively discussing with them now.
What's one of those worth now?
Through Mr. Chair, probably $1.3 million.
Well, that's not bad. It was 1-1 when we bought it.
Okay, further speakers, I'm going to do the motion here in a moment. Did I see your hand, Councillor? Or, all right, I'm going to go to Brunton and then Mayor Luke.
Just very quickly, Mr. Dix, or Chief Dix, I think I asked this question before. The Fire Underwriters Association or whatever, they are an independent group that evaluate your, I guess, your departments or service, and then they recommend to our insurance company. Is that how that works?
Summing up, through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. And are they the ones that make the decision that says if 20 years are up, your trucks are no longer appropriate?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct.
What legal status do they have?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure of legalities. I know that's been in effect for many decades, and it's well represented across Canada.
Well, I guess my question is, if we, and I know we're going to be looking at insurance sometime in the near future, maybe it's something we could ask our Candy to our staff to look at. When I'd like to know a little bit more about how, if we, what kind of, what's the word I want, penalty if we did not adhere to the Fire Underwriters Association when we are looking at insurance for our municipality. If our municipal insurance covers a fire truck, whatever year it might be, why do we need somebody else telling us, you know, here's what you should be doing? You know what I mean? It's like the $450 helmet in the EMS. I'm kind of baffled at that one when a fireman's helmet's $190. It just boggles my mind. Thank you.
Councillor, I may be confused, but I think what the chief was talking about is that if the Fire Underwriters Association determines that we have trucks on the road that are not deemed to be suitable, it's not so much our insurance, it's potential residential insurance for people served by those fire stations that might have their premiums affected. Is that not correct, Chief?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, that's correct. The impact on the residents would be felt because we would lose our certification, but it is also a department-wide as well for the county.
Okay, so it's both, in other words. Okay.
I don't want to get into an argument about insurance, and that's a whole different ballgame as far as I'm concerned. Like, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Mayor Luke?
Well, thank you. Speaking of the motion, I am going to support the motion, Mr. Chair. I was not happy when I saw that our original approved budget was $1.6 million, and now we're being asked for an additional $363,000 to a total of $2 million. This equipment is getting expensive, and I wish there was more competition among manufacturers, specifically in Canada. I think that's some of the problem, and the exchange rate is not well at this time. But we have deferred some of these purchases. I recognize this. I still stand by, and I will say it here, as I've said to many people in the past, that I do believe in buying good, dependable, safe equipment for our EMS and our firefighters and those that are on the road working under pretty stressful conditions at time and unsafe conditions, that we we must, at least I'm always aware that we need to make sure that they have the equipment to do the job. This is life-saving business that we're in, and having said that, at the same time, I trust that our committees that put together these specs realize that the money doesn't grow on trees in Norfolk County. Believe me, this council struggles and struggles to keep taxes down and try to provide a good level of service. So I do support this, and I do thank the committee for bringing this forward. I'm not the happiest guy to spend this extra $363,000, but it's probably not the best time to be buying U.S. fire trucks. But we did defer this, and we need to not fall any further behind. And the money is in the reserves, but it is taxpayer money that was put there. It all comes from the same wallets and purses. So not, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Councillor Wells.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I will also be supporting the motion because, Mr. Chair, what other option do we have? I mean, that's pretty simple. We've gone out to tender. We have received the tenders. This is the lowest price tender. I don't see another option.
Yes. That's a fair question. Chief, can you inform us likely
Through
when
Mr.
they be
Chairman,
delivered?
the standard's anywhere from 270 days up to over 300 days,
Yeah.
and depends on their build time. Sometimes it can be done a bit quicker.
So perhaps at the end of the year if we're lucky.
Could be.
Okay, I think we've had a good discussion about this, and it is a significant decision, but I am going to go to the motion now, except that I'll allow Councillor Wells another.
Well, just on that, if we don't get them until they're a year old, does that year count towards their age? I mean, that's a big difference.
They are 2018 model trucks, I think, Councillor.
Just to, Mr. Chairman, once we get the apparatus and we put it in service, we would consider the 20 years starting from then.
Okay. All right. I think then if I see no further hands, and I hope I don't, I'm going to call the question now. Councillor Geisens has moved that report CSD 1703, award of tender for 1 pumper and 2 tankers be received, and that the staff report CSD 1703 be awarded, actually the contract, I guess, be awarded to Fort Garry Fire Trucks Limited in the amount of $1,998,174 net of HST. And further, that the mayor and clerk be authorized to execute a contract with Fort Garry Fire Trucks Limited, and I appreciate that that's Manitoba. And further, that the approved 2017 capital budget be amended to increase the replacement of Pumper 7, Station 7, Langton, from $595,000 to $660,600. Tanker 1, Station 1, from $520,000 to $668,787. And tanker number 6, Station 6, Cortland, be increased from $520,000 to $668,787, with funding to be provided from the Fire Vehicle and Equipment Reserve Fund. Those in favor? I see no one opposed, so that is carried. Thank you very much, Council, and gentlemen, thank all of you for being here. You're welcome to leave if you wish to do so. Council, we're going to move very quickly then back to our report that we were to deal with following our deputation. This is on page 25 of your agenda, and it is staff report CSD 17-01 relating to governance for the Port Dover Harbor Marina. And again, to our deputation folks, thank you for waiting for this. Mr. Cridlin, over to you.
Thank you through the chair to County Council. I will spend a few moments here and discuss the report and maybe add to the comments. I want to thank Paul Lipsett, or Mr. Lipsett, I guess, for doing an excellent deputation. Paul and I had worked a little bit in the past and talked before we came in tonight. One thing I want to start with is it's no secret here that I'm the new person to this Dover Marina, but I want council to be assured that I have studied the past tapes when deputations have come. I've read past reports. I've talked to Mr. Lipset and his group, talked to other groups and to staff. But one thing I want to be sure of that this is a council decision tonight. Report 17-1 leaves that open to a council decision. We're looking for direction. So anything that I may say, if I am correct, please correct me if you know different, because council needs to know all the information I think has to be correct for them to make a decision tonight. The report has some new information in it, and some of it is a cut and paste from previous reports. As you can see, the previous county manager, Keith Robichaud, has quite a write-up in here. I've talked to Keith, and I think I can answer anything in his section as well. And the other thing, before I get going through the three different governance model approaches, I'd like to maybe challenge council, if that's it's not direct, it's challenge them to think as we go through these to think, what do they want this marina to do for Norfolk County and as an asset? And when I say that, I will bring that up in each of these points. Some of the past tapes, I think, got drugged down in what is a service board versus an advisory board, and I'm thinking if we go at it from the other end, what do you want this marina to do for Norfolk County? So anyways, I'll start with the status quo. It's the easiest one to explain. It is a business division of the Community Services Department. Been like that since, I believe, 2008. The marina makes around 1.1 to 1.2 million gross in a year. Out of that comes maintenance, capital, that sort of thing. And council is left with a net profit of approximately $500,000. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more. Council has been in the habit of taking, I believe it's around $210,000, putting that into a reserve, taking $250,000 of that to offsetting a levy. So all the people in Norfolk County enjoy a bit of a tax break. I think the $250 works out to about a 1/4 percentage point. And what I'd like to say at this point is, if that is what council wants out of that marina, that's what staff can offer you. If council would like a little more income generated, you could tell staff, we could look at user fees, we could cut back on expenses, that sort of thing. If council would like to see more capital put in the marina, then we can put it in the 10-year capital and bring it towards you. I think Mr. Lipset brought up a big point here tonight that with up to now, I think there's been some frustration in what is the ownership going to be, what is the governance, the model of governance going to be, and when things came to the capital table, they were always set aside for that fact. I think we have crossed that line. We're Norfolk County Council, and I believe rightfully so as a taxpayer and as a manager that it is the best thing to keep this marina. So if you like what we have now, staff are recommending no changes. If, on the other hand, council sees the benefits of the advisory board, which Mr. Lipset mentions, there is no doubt that the advisory board allows for outside input. People come in with experiences, past business experience, private sector, that they can relate to the marina operation that likely staff don't have. I would also say with that, I think if council does decide to go on advisory board, I would ask that the issue of the term of reference and what exactly council wants very clear. And Councillor Haidt hit the nail on the head when the advisory committees I've been involved in before, people volunteer their time to be on an advisory board for council. They feel they can bring something to the table. They feel that they can make changes that are worthwhile. And at times, it gets, they need to understand that council does have the final say. And a lot of times when recommendations come to this table, if they are turned down, that's where I find an advisory board has some weakness, because the members feel if they're not going to listen to me, why am I here? So if we do reinstate the advisory board, I think we have to get it right. Mr. Lipset mentioned in our talk tonight that we actually do have an advisory board with the Port Dover Marina. It was, I believe it's bylaw 209-19. And they haven't met for a few years, and I think the reason they met was, haven't met, it was just the fact that the future was crowded and nobody knew where it was going, so the members quit meeting. So that is still, my understanding, still alive and well. If council does want to get the advisory board going again, I believe, at least I would like to see that the present a committee that it's tweaked a little bit. And Mr. Lipset hit on a couple things that I have in mind, like 9 members. I personally think is too many. It's very tough to make a decision with 9. I think we have to cut that down. I also see that the group met 10 times a year. I don't doubt in Mr. Baird's world, he has a lot of these advisory boards. I'll say NEAC, I think they meet monthly or on a regular schedule because there's planning applications that come ahead. So they need the information, they answer, they get it through to council. In this, I would say 4 meetings a year, maybe 5. I mean, that's something we would bring a report back to council with these tweaks. Because what I see is if we're going to meet monthly, you're not going to see a lot of change from month to month. And I think that too disinterests people where they want to see changes faster. And I think in this case, I would recommend less meetings. With that said, what I would suggest is that I think we still can get this together in 2017. But it would be the end of 2017, as I could see taking back to staff, perhaps working with Mr. Lipset's group, tweaking this, coming forward with another report, and rescinding the old accessory board, bringing a new one in. The last one I will talk very briefly about is the services board, which I know in the past, watching the tapes, it seemed to get to that point, and conversations would fall off. When Keith Robichaud left, I was weak on arguing what a services board is. So I made a call to the county solicitor, and they in a 5-minute talk really helped me. What they said is there's been changes in recent years with municipal act, corporation law, and to not even discuss a municipal board, service board with them until council knew what they wanted. Because they said you could come to me but without seed information, we don't know what they want, and we can't make any recommendations. So we talked about things of liability, financial, legal. If you were to get in a services board, they're awful tough to get out of, they're expensive to put together. I don't think that is on the board tonight, but if council does want to go with the services board, I'm recommending we spend some money with a solicitor, get them some seed information, and then he can answer, this is good, this is the way you want to go, or here's your downfalls. So I think with that, I've talked enough, and I'll turn it over to County Council for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cridlin, for that overview of the report and summation of what we're dealing with. And I'll now entertain questions or comments on the staff report. Mr. Cridlin did point out to us that the recommendation is not specific, so we're going to have to provide some specific wording depending on which approach you wish to implement following this evening. Mayor Luke first, please.
Mr. Chair, I would like to put a recommendation right on the floor.
That'd be great.
Debate it if you don't mind. I think the report gives all the options, but my recommendation would be that staff report CSD 1701 governance for the Port Dover Harbor Marina be received as information. And secondly, that council approve a Port Dover Harbor Marina Advisory Board, and further that staff be directed to bring forward a report, and I don't care what type of wording the deputy clerk wants to put, but to bring forward a report outlining the specific details, i.e. board membership, times of meeting, purpose, etc. Terms of reference, absolutely, thank you, etc., etc. And if I can speak to that?
Please.
I certainly support this. I think that, you can see from our deputation the passion that is out there to have citizens in Port Dover and area be involved in improvements to the way that wonderful marina, if I can call it that, because I think it is. And I'm not ready tonight to debate all the things of how many members or how many times a year, but I think the first step, Mr. Chair, if I may, is to find out if this council supports an advisory board or not, and then if they do, get staff to do the legwork and get it back to us. Thank you.
Thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor now. Councillor Hyde, I think, is my next speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll certainly support that motion. That's what it's been called for. That's what we're going to give them. And I hope it's not the rubber stamp committee and people just feel dejected over it. But as far as the timeline goes, this was a committee that was previously formed, and I wouldn't think that we would have to wait till 2018. That's the one part that's bugging me.
Yeah.
All right, summer's coming up. We have a few months. The TAC committee was a brand new committee. It took us 3-4 months to throw that together. We already have a terms of reference for the Port Rowan, which needed to be rewritten anyway, so this might be a good time to do that as well. But I'd like to see it in place in the summertime myself. And then get some input. We need a user group down there and some advisors from our customers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think Mr. Cridlin is committed to that as well. I think he indicated he'll work at trying to get this done well before the 2018 voting